Hi, so I'm going to talk about vitamin D and bone metabolism in goats. Specifically, I will be referencing how those work in pregnant goats or dams and the growing goat kids. So there are a couple of sources where one can get vitamin D. One is through the skin when UV light is exposed. Another is through the diet where vitamin D2 comes from. These both can be synthesized into the active form of vitamin D when it goes through the liver and the kidney. Once it becomes the active form, it is dispersed to the intestine, used for cell immunity and for bone metabolism. So calcium is used to form bones, and that's initiated when vitamin D binds to vitamin D receptors in osteoblasts or bone cells. Biomarkers are used by veterinarians and medical doctors to track certain processes that go on in the body. A biomarker that is used for bone formation is osteocalcin and alkaline phosphatase. These are not the only biomarkers for bone formation, but they are the main ones used in research on vitamin D and its involvement in bone metabolism in pregnant and dairy goats. Calcium resorption or calcium mobilization is when calcium is taken out of the bones or it is released from the bone cells. And this typically happens when calcium levels in the blood are low. Vitamin D and PTH, or the parathyroid hormone, they increase calcium mobility when calcium levels are low. A biomarker for this reaction is an epitope of the carboxy-terminal telepeptide of type 1 collagen. So as I said before, PTH, or the parathyroid hormone, helps vitamin D to initiate bone resorption in cases of low calcium levels. Another substance that works towards calcium homeostasis is calcitonin, and it works oppositely of vitamin D and the parathyroid hormone. It initiates calcium excretion, and it stops high levels of calcium absorption from the small intestine. Vitamin D and the parathyroid hormone not only initiate bone resorption, but they also increase the amount of calcium absorption in the small intestine. So there are a couple of things that regulate how vitamin D is absorbed and used in the body. First is fats. Vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, and so it can be incorporated into micelles, which can then passively diffuse through cell membranes, so that creates a situation for better absorption of vitamin D. So research was done on how varying quantities of calcium and vitamin D3 supplemented in a milk diet would affect the vitamin D levels in the blood. When vitamin D3 alone was supplemented in the milk diet, it resulted in higher blood levels of vitamin D, and this is likely because of the fat content of milk. When calcium was supplemented by itself, it did not have an effect on the normal circulating levels of vitamin D3. However, it did, when they were supplemented together, calcium canceled out some of the absorption of the vitamin D3, and this is probably because it inhibits lipid absorption. So then the vitamin D3 that would normally be absorbed because of higher fat content in the milk, well, it was not being absorbed as efficiently because of the inhibiting calcium. When there was a decrease in the availability of calcium in the diet, the amount of D3 formation increased in the body, and this was to initiate bone resorption to maintain that calcium homeostasis. Protein also affects how vitamin D3 shows up in the blood. When there was a low intake of protein or nitrogen in an experiment where different groups of goats were fed varying levels of calcium and nitrogen, when there was a low intake of nitrogen, it resulted in low vitamin D3 levels, and it was shown to make the parathyroid hormone less sensitive to calcium and vitamin D3 levels. So the efficiency of this system of calcium homeostasis that involves the parathyroid hormone and vitamin D will take a hit if protein levels are not maintained in the diet. So now I'm going to tie all this into goats, specifically pregnant goats and young goat kids, and how all of these affect the bone metabolism and growth of a goat fetus and the lactation of pregnant goats. So there are generally at least two organisms involved when a goat is pregnant. There's the dam and the fetus, and there can be more than one fetus. Goats are prone to have twins or triplets, but generally speaking, there are two categories of organisms that we talk about. So as far as the dam is concerned, during lactation and parturition, there's an increased necessity for calcium because that goat has to not only keep up with its own calcium needs in muscle contractions and bone metabolism, but it also has to create the bones in the fetus and maintain calcium levels during lactation. So that's generally going to bone resorption, and the absorption of calcium from the diet is generally going to increase. That increase is not really going to be affected by the fetus number, but earlier in the pregnancy, during the first 80 days of gestation, generally the dam goes through a period where she stores extra calcium, extra nutrition, so that later all of that can be channeled into the main production stage of the fetus, and during lactation can put as much nutrients as possible into that milk. During the first pregnancy, this effect on the dam's health is going to be especially significant, but after that first pregnancy, the dam is going to adjust easier to that process of lactation and creating the fetus, and so after that first pregnancy, it's not going to be as detrimental to the health of that dam. Anionic salts play a role in the pregnant goats and their processes as far as moving calcium and metabolizing bones. They were found to increase bone resorption during gestation in dairy goats. They would initialize more mobilization of bone calcium and increased intestinal absorption of calcium. The overall function was not very well known based off of that one exercise, but these were the observations found during research on the function of anionic salts in bone metabolism. So the fetus, as we talked about before, there could be more than one, but their bone formation is of high priority either way. This is attributed to the skeleton's importance in structure and protection of other softer organs. It was found that restrictions on the dam's diet did not affect whether or not the kid would acquire bone disease. The researchers changed the diet of the dam to see if the kid would be less likely to acquire this disease, but there was no difference. And it was also found that nutritional deficiencies in early pregnancy would actually increase fetal bone formation. And this is probably because of the storage that the dam went through before and during the first part of pregnancy went towards the fetal bone formation as opposed to storing them in the dam's bones. So goat kids are going to go through a transition. They start out with milk as their main diet, and later they'll have more of a plant-based diet, and they are ruminants, so they will have microbe cultures in their digestional tract. When they have milk as their main diet component, they are ingesting more fats in that, which, as we've seen before, will promote the absorption of vitamin D. Later on, when they start ingesting more plants, there will be a little bit of an inhibition. This was thought to occur because plant sterols inhibit cholesterol absorption, which has a very similar structure to vitamin D, and so it was thought that it might be doing the same thing to vitamin D and inhibiting that absorption as well. The microbes inside the goats will also be developing as they grow older, and microbes are thought to degrade vitamin D, which will decrease the amount that will be absorbed by the goat itself also. Overall, vitamin D plays an important role in bone metabolism. It's especially important during pregnancy and lactation of goats. Ruminant growth, so the goat growth will change how the vitamin is metabolized and used in the body, and there may need to be some changes in how it is absorbed based on the diet of the ruminant or goat. It does not function alone. It is dependent on very many dietary and environmental conditions, including the anionic salts, the amount of protein that's taken in, how much calcium and vitamin D supplement is given will change how bone metabolism or vitamin D levels are observed. And altitude, while it doesn't have very much effect on how much UV radiation is absorbed, the UV radiation is very important in vitamin D synthesis because it is the source of the most efficient precursor of the active form of vitamin D. So these are all of my references, and thank you for listening.